What's happening inside the Pittsburgh Steelers organization right now isn't just a routine coaching shuffle or an off-season footnote buried under draft talk and free agency speculation. It's a slow, deliberate power shift that tells you exactly how Mike McCarthy intends to reshape the franchise from the inside out. And if you understand how NFL buildings really work, how cap spreadsheets influence coaching hires, how locker rooms read instability long before fans do, and how pressure travels downward from ownership to the last assistant in the room, then you recognize this moment as a defining fork in the road for Pittsburgh's next era. The interview of Texas Tech outside linebackers coach CJ. You might look minor on the surface, but it's a signal flare, because teams don't bring in fast-rising college developers unless they're preparing for a philosophical pivot, and RU's profile tells you exactly what kind of pivot this is. He's not a legacy hire, not a friend of a friend, not a retread cycling through NFL staff rooms, but a former late-round NFL player who clawed his way through special teams work, quality control, and position coaching, developing edge defenders who project as early draft capital, and that matters in a building now facing tough cap math on defense, aging contracts at premium positions, and the need to restock cheaply without sacrificing production. When a franchise interviews a coach like RU, while also competing with a division rival like Dallas for his services, it's not coincidence, it's market validation. And McCarthy understands that if you're going to survive roster churn and cap compression, your coaching staff has to outperform its pay grade just as much as your players do. That's why the lack of a direct McCarthy connection here actually strengthens the message, because this isn't comfort hiring, this is structural hiring, the kind you do when you know your margin for error is shrinking and development has to replace spending. At the same time, the Steelers are watching one of their most quietly influential figures walk out the door. And anyone who's ever been inside an NFL locker room knows the running backs coach is far more than a drill supervisor. Because Eddie Faulkner wasn't just responsible for Najee Harris's consistency, or Jaylen Warren's emergence, or Kenneth Gainwell's immediate impact. He was a stabilizing force in a room that defined the offense's identity during years of quarterback instability. The numbers don't lie, Harris surpassing 1,000 rushing yards in 4 straight seasons, absorbing over 100 carries while remaining a dual-threat option. Warren and Gainwell combining for nearly 1,500 rushing yards and over 800 receiving yards in a single season. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen without a coach who understands load management, personality management, and the psychological grind of being the offense's safety net. Losing Faulkner to a division rival like Baltimore isn't just about play design or technique. It's about losing institutional knowledge at a moment when McCarthy is already asking the roster to adapt to new voices, new systems, and new expectations. That's where the pressure compounds, because McCarthy didn't inherit a blank slate, he inherited a roster in transition, a fan base demanding immediate relevance, and a front office balancing loyalty with urgency. And when you overhaul a staff this aggressively, every departure and hire carries ripple effects you can't see on a depth chart. Pat Meyer leaving for Buffalo, Arthur Smith jumping to Ohio State, secondary continuity evaporating despite early reports. These aren't random exits, they're the natural consequence of a regime change that's moving faster than some assistants are willing or able to ride. McCarthy retaining Tom Arth shows he values quarterback continuity even amid uncertainty, but the rest of the offensive structure is still under construction, and the fact that Scott Tolzien walked away from the offensive coordinator opportunity tells you how complicated that job is right now. Because you're not just designing an offense, you're potentially designing one for a quarterback room that includes Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, a possible rookie, and the looming polarizing presence of Aaron Rodgers. When insiders like Mark Kaboly suggest Rodgers is effectively signaling a return without formally committing, that creates a unique kind of tension. Because coaches have to plan 2 playbooks, one built around a Hall of Fame veteran who demands autonomy and instant contention, and another built around developmental patience if the future arrives sooner than expected. That uncertainty bleeds into every coaching interview, every staff decision, every internal debate about philosophy versus pragmatism. McCarthy choosing to call plays himself in 2026 is both a declaration of confidence and an admission of risk, because it centralizes power and accountability in a way that can unify a team or fracture it depending on results. Hiring Patrick Graham as defensive coordinator and adding experienced voices like Jason Simmons and Scott McCurley suggests a desire for schematic clarity and communication efficiency, But it also raises the bar for position coaches, because in a streamlined hierarchy, there's nowhere to hide if development stalls. That's why the IU interview matters, because edge defenders are the heartbeat of modern NFL defenses, and developing them internally is the difference between contending and treading water when cap dollars are scarce. The Steelers have always sold stability as part of their identity, but what we're seeing now is controlled disruption, a calculated willingness to endure short-term discomfort, to recalibrate long-term direction. And that's not something you do unless ownership is aligned, the front office is committed, and the head coach understands that his legacy in Pittsburgh will be defined not by nostalgia, but by whether this transition produces sustainable competitiveness. Players notice this, veterans feel it, young guys respond to it, and rivals are watching closely, because a franchise that's willing to lose trusted assistants, compete aggressively for rising talent, and absorb the noise of uncertainty is a franchise betting on its process over public perception. Whether that bet pays off will depend on how quickly McCarthy's vision translates from meeting rooms to Sundays, how effectively new voices earn credibility in the locker room, and how decisively the quarterback question is resolved. But one thing is clear, this is not an off-season drift, it's an inflection point. And if you want to understand where the Steelers are headed before the standings tell the story, this is the moment you study, discuss and debate. So stay locked in, share your perspective, and make sure you're part of the conversation as this new chapter takes shape.